world of Terra, there are many interesting foods, some of which look delicious while others are quite questionable. Make you think about them. However, there are some amazing items within Arknights that seem to be identical to what we have in real life. And we've created a couple of things here on the channel already that match those items. And we're going to do that again today. And with that said, many characters often tend to reference foods that they like. They reference foods and drinks and various things that they've had or that they really like on their journey across Terra. Now, today, our focus is going to be on none other than our favorite red-haired angel with a love for apple pie. Yep, that's right. We're talking about Exusiai, and we are going to be making an apple pie today. Now, Exusiai is our inspiration, and apple pie is something that we have in reality. It's based in reality here, though there are many types of apple pie. With that said, Exusiai loves apple pie so much that during the course of our Masses Travels event, Exusiai and Lemuen had a code phrase that they used multiple times, and we got to experience this during that story. What was that code phrase? Well, if the sisters ran into some sort of a trouble that they couldn't resolve, a fight that they couldn't amicably resolve, or they had a secret that they weren't ready to talk about yet, but they wanted to put it off and let the other understand, they would use this code phrase, and oftentimes it would end up with Exusiai saying, "Apple pie with mayonnaise," to which Lemuen would respond, "How to slice, want another." Now, that's a pretty cool way of overcoming your arguments and things, right? So, can you guess what we're making by now? Yep, that's right. Today we are gonna make Exusiai's apple pie with mayonnaise. Now wait, I know what you're thinking. Apple pie with mayonnaise? How is that even gonna come close to tasting good? Let me take you on a little bit of a mind trip here and explain a couple of things in my thought process on how we could make this delicious. When I was a kid growing up, I had many different forms of apple pie, many different types, and there's different ways that you can make it where, you use a full crust and encapsulate the apples with like a sugary gel type thing that surrounds it, or they make canned apple pie filling for those that maybe they just want to make a quick dessert, so they throw it together in a pie crust that's pre-made, simple, easy, done. There are different types of apples that you can use to bake the pies with, and then there's some other alternative ways to make an apple pie that are a bit fun. And I believe that I found the one grounded in a specific recipe that I grew up that is one of my favorite pies that I've ever eaten. I grew up having multiple times throughout my life. And that is something called sour cream apple pie. Now, going back on the mayonnaise, the fact that we're going to be using mayonnaise in baking, another thing to take into account, there are a lot of actual recipes that do use mayonnaise in baking. Do a little research on it. It's kind of fun to see how many different things will incorporate baking, from cookies to cakes and so many other things. And the first and one of the only times that I've actually had mayonnaise in baking was when I was a teenager. Somebody brought into school chocolate mayonnaise cake. It incorporates the mayo into the cake, which kind of helps to embolden the chocolate flavor as well as keep it very moist and dense. It was pretty cool. It was something that I enjoyed. So, how can we incorporate this into our sour cream apple pie? So let's break down the sour cream apple pie a little bit for you. It's a little bit of a delicious difference in the apple pie. You're gonna make a sweet pie crust that'll be your bottom, and inside your filling consists of apples, as well as sour cream and eggs and vanilla and flour and a few different other ingredients that you mix together. You put the mixture inside that pie crust and top it with a streusel topping and then bake it. And when it's done, it's a little bit denser, thicker, it stands up a little more. However, the sour cream brings out a little bit more of the flavor of everything. The apples retain their tartness, and it has a little bit of a bold tang to it. It's very interesting how it comes out. Just like classic apple pie, it does go well with some ice cream, but we're not worried about that. What we're going to do in order to make this good, we're going to take the mayonnaise And in order to give the mayonnaise, which has a different flavor profile than sour cream, to give it that tang, to allow it to be the replacement, we are going to combine mayonnaise with some fresh lemon juice. We're gonna use some lemon juice, squozen from these, combine it together, and that will become our replacement ingredient, taking out the sour cream. With that said, I think we have our idea here in mind, and I think we'll compensate enough for the difference in flavor that this will hold up and make a successful and delicious pie. And if not, we're gonna find out along the way. So, we're gonna make this pie, top it with a streusel topping, and an image of our favorite angel in the end. But for now, let's make it a reality. Exusiai's apple pie with mayonnaise. Let's get started. All right, so as you guys have seen many times before in the past, we are over here at the kitchen counter where we're gonna get started and show you guys everything here of the process of how we're gonna make this. But just before we do, let me give you a quick reminder that I am not a professionally trained chef or anything like that. Everything I do here is for entertainment and has been learned over years of practice, experimentation, and just wanting to feed my family some good food. I'm a home cook, nothing more, and I like to have fun in the kitchen. So I hope you'll have fun along with me and enjoy these recipes. Now, the recipes that we are going to be using, I will give you some links in the description for some real basic ones, and I will put the ingredients and things that I use in the description as well. And the first of which is a basic sweet pie crust. Now, this is one that my mom taught me, and she got out of a cookbook from a famous chef, Emeril Lagasse. Now, that also makes me wonder, I will find his recipe and put it in the comments for you guys, or in the description, but how many famous chefs do we have on Terra? Yes, we know about Mobufu from the Blaze Altar and You event, but are there any chefs that have TV type shows? Are there any chefs like a Gordon Ramsay on Terra? That would be interesting to see. But I digress. Let's go ahead and get started with this pie crust. And basically we're gonna need some flour, sugar, salt, butter, shortening, and ice water. So the first thing up though is we need our butter, which I've had sitting out a little bit here, so it's kind of softened. And we need to cut this whole stick of butter into roughly 1/2-inch pieces. So nothing too crazy, but what I like to do to get rough 1/2-inch pieces is I like to split it long ways both times. And then we kind of have cube shapes because this will get cubed, and then we'll cut it into cubes. So let's start by using our knife and just carefully right down the middle. Okay, now we've got it halved. We're gonna flip it over, do it again. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This just helps it to incorporate a little bit better once we get going. And then let's cut it into some rough cubes here. Nothing too hard about that. And we're done. Now let's go ahead and push that aside and get ourselves a bowl. And in here, we'll start by adding our flour, salt, and sugar. Then we'll add our butter and shortening, work it together with our hands, and add in the water little by little until we get the desired texture and everything. Once that's done, we're just gonna wrap it up, put it in the fridge to sit for about 1/2 an hour while we start working on the pie filling. So first up, let's get our flour over here. And we're going to need about 1.5 cups plus 2 tablespoons. So that's 8 ounces of flour. Let's get ourselves our measuring cup and scoop that out. And like I said, I've already started my oven. It's preheated to about 425. Try to get a little bit out here. So we have an even 1.5 cups. And let's get 2 tablespoons. So that should be what we need for our flour to make our crust. Now, you could sift this together. I put it all together and I'll mix these dry ingredients first before anything else. Now, we need our sugar. Let's go ahead and get a tablespoon of that. And this just adds a little bit of sweetness to the crust. Nothing too special, but keeps it from being just plain and bland. And then last but not least, we need about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So You can use basic table salt if you want. I'm actually going to use kosher salt. That's just what I happen to have on hand. It's either this or the pink Himalayan salt, which is what I usually have, but I'll go ahead and use the kosher salt. This should be perfectly adequate in this recipe. And now we'll go ahead and combine this together. And I'm just going to use a whisk, incorporate all the ingredients, all these dry ones here first, together, so that we have them all mixed up before we start to add our shortening. And then it'll be our butter. All right. So that's a good start. Next, let's get our shortening, which we need 2 tablespoons of. So we'll use our trusty tablespoon, get it kind of packed in there. Now I like to use a spoon as well, just to pack it in and make sure that we scrape off the excess, because I mean, it's shortening. You don't really want to go overboard with it, but you want to have a nice, even, level tablespoon. And that looks fairly good. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's never perfect here in my kitchen. So if it was perfect, I would be a professionally trained chef, or at least somebody much more adequate than a basic home level cook, right? But there we go. There's 2 solid whole tablespoons. We'll use this excess, and I'll use my finger just to push that off. None of you guys are eating it. I am. So that's all that matters. And then we'll close up our shortening, get that out of the way, and we're going to add our butter cubes in. Now, essentially what we're going to be doing here, we're going to take our hands and we're going to incorporate this all together till it starts to get crumbly and we get some like pea-sized shaped crumbles, if you will. However, those crumbles per se essentially are the beginning of forming our crust. And once we get that, we're going to start to incorporate it even further by adding our water. It says about the ice water. Now it calls for 3 tablespoons, but I tend to find that I use more than the 3 tablespoons. But you don't want to go too much further, too much more, it'll become too sticky. So we need this dough to hold up and kind of find a decent rigid texture. But for now, a very simple way to get this made is just to get your hands in there, enjoy having the fun and the feel of mashing this and squishing it all together and creating the base of your dough. And as you can see, it doesn't take long. The flour and sugar and everything, the salt starts to coat and combine with our more wet ingredients, so to speak, and begins to form little shapes and things here. Now, if you guys look, the texture is a little bit different. It's a little crumbly, and it's incorporated together. We have the butter, we have the salt, we have the sugar mixed in with our shortening, and everything's kind of ready here to add this water and really bring it all together. So we'll start by adding our 3 tablespoons. I put a little piece of ice in there. Didn't mean to, but that's okay. It'll melt. It's just tiny. And this part is where things begin to get sticky. So I'll put my tablespoon back in there, and let's just start getting it turned in there. Start adding that water, incorporating it all together further, and really start to see our dough come together further here. Now, as you can see, it's coming together further. We have some larger chunks, but it's not quite there yet as we're incorporating it. And this is where I tend to add just a little bit more water to bring it together further. But again, you've got to be careful, because if you add too much, it's going to become too sticky. So I'm going to start with just 1 additional tablespoon of water as we work it in further, and we'll see if these crumbles and larger pieces start to form more of a dough. Work it for just a couple more minutes here. Now that we're done here, just that 1 additional tablespoon was all we needed this time. Sometimes it seems like depending on the weather, you may need a little bit more. It's weird how weather tends to affect baking. I don't know if that's exactly true or not, but I just feel like the conditions, the humidity in the kitchen, and sometimes if it's a cooler day and it's not super dry, it just seems to affect things differently. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that. Maybe I'm weird. Today, it's a cooler night. I'm doing this late at night and everything's coming out very nicely. So I have my dough here and you can actually see a little bit of the butter spots and things in it, but I've incorporated it pretty well. Now, you don't want to overwork it. If you overwork it, it'll kind of start to re-crumble and it can also dry out a little bit. You don't want that to happen. But another word of advice is, if you add a little too much water and you find it getting sticky, don't panic. It's all right. All you have to do is add just a little bit more flour. Don't go too much, maybe a teaspoon or a tablespoon at most, and just work that in to try and get rid of some of the stickiness. Sometimes what I like to do is if I end up making it just a tad too sticky, I will use flour, extra flour, when I'm rolling the dough out after I've let it set. But now that we have our dough combined and done, we are going to go ahead and form it into roughly a disc shape here. And there we have it. I'm gonna get plastic wrap. We're gonna get a nice sized piece of plastic wrap here. We're going to wrap our dough and it's gonna go into the refrigerator for at least 30 minutes before we go ahead and roll it out. If you go a little bit too early, it just doesn't allow the ingredients to work properly when you go to bake it. The fat, essentially the butter, will render better when it's cooler and you roll it out and then put it into the oven to bake. So we've got that wrapped. Let's go ahead and get it to the fridge and then we'll get started on the other things. All right, so next up, we're gonna start combining our dry ingredients and get ready here to make what we need for our filling. So to start, we're gonna get some dry stuff. Like I said, we're gonna kick off with sugar. We need 3/4 cup of sugar. There we go. Let's get 3/4 cup of sugar into our bowl there. We'll go ahead and close that back up for now. Next up, we need our flour. We're gonna need our trusty tablespoon back, and we need 2 of those. 1 and 2. Okay. And we will set our flour aside because we will need that again later on. Next up, we need 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Well, for that, I still have our 1/4 teaspoon sitting aside here, so we're just gonna do about half of that. Just a teeny tiny bit of salt. Make sure we get it into our little measuring spoon. Okay, there we go. It's about half full, and we're done with that. Now that's our basic stuff, and the recipe that I'll share with you does use the basic things, but I like to spice mine up a little bit. And what's Exusiai without a little spice, huh? Without a little fire. So we're gonna add some additional things in here. And I like to use roughly about a 1/4 teaspoon or so of these ingredients. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit more for here. We're gonna add some cinnamon. So we'll actually add about 1/2 a teaspoon of cinnamon. So we'll take 2 of those, put that in. And then we'll toss a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Now, of course, like I said, the basic recipe, you don't have to add these seasonings, these spices to it, but I like to add them. I like a little extra kick in my pie. And there is a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. Now again, we're just gonna go ahead and stir this all together, make a simple blend here. And then we're gonna get ready to add our wet ingredients. But before we can do that, we have to make our sour cream substitution. right? So, in order to make that substitution, what are we gonna do? As I said, we're gonna combine our mayonnaise with some fresh squeezed lemon juice. So, let's set our mixture aside there. I will get another bowl and our mayonnaise. So, let's open this up. It's a brand new sealed container. And this calls for a cup of sour cream. So, we're gonna use the equivalent cup of mayonnaise. After we open it all up. Perfect. Okay, now I have a half a cup here. So we'll get a spoon and we're gonna fill it twice. Now again, if you remember, mayonnaise is a different flavor than sour cream. Similar in consistency, texture-wise, things like that. So that kind of makes it easy to use as a substitute to hold up the same. But if you want it to have that similar flavor, we're gonna have to add something to really change things, to change the profile, to not let the already eggy flavor of mayonnaise overpower this. Now, of course, there's different kinds of mayo out there that you can get, so I'm just using a plain, regular off-the-store shelf, store brand mayonnaise. And again, we're using 1 cup. So, whoops, spilled a little on our counter there. Clean that up. All right, let's get rid of our garbage and then close this up. We'll use our spoon to combine things. Now, I've got a lemon squeezer here. Let's push this aside and I'm just gonna roll my lemon. Woo! It actually split. That's kind of cool. Let's get a knife out of our drawer here. Just use a real basic knife. I'm gonna split the lemon in half on my cutting board off screen. And then let's get this in here. And let's squeeze it. Squeeze our lemon juice into our mayonnaise. That was a very juicy lemon. But I'm gonna add the whole thing. It's probably a little too much, but the lemon juice will actually do good anyways with the apples, to coat the apples, because a lot of times they use lemon juice in order to preserve the apples from browning too quick. So having the extra lemon juice isn't gonna be necessarily a bad thing. Now this will thin it down a little bit, of course, but we'll use our spoon, incorporate it together. And now that it's incorporated, it takes on a different flavor profile. So it cuts off some of the egginess and changes the mayonnaise, the profile, to something more akin to a sour cream. Now, if you want to, you can add more of the lemon juice, but I don't want to go overboard. So I'm going to leave it at this, and we will incorporate this in. So next, again, let's get our dry mixture over here. Let's add this in. Okay. That's good enough. And then we need our egg. 1 egg. Crack that. And put that in there. Okay, and then this calls for about a half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. So I'm going to add, whoops, went a little bit over, but we're going to add a half. And actually, we are going to make it about 3/4. So I'm using a 1/4 teaspoon here, so I had to use it 3 times. We're gonna do 3/4 just to add a little bit of extra vanilla to also help to cut off some of the egginess of the flavor of the mayonnaise. So let's go ahead and stir this all, combine it, get it all together, and make our mixture for our filling. Now, if you really wanted to, you could use a hand mixer for this part, or even a stand mixer, whichever you prefer. But this is so simple, you don't need to go crazy with anything like that. You could just use a whisk by hand if you're comfortable. And for me, this is therapeutic. Some of you may know that a couple years ago, I did break my wrist. So every once in a while, it's fun to do stuff like this that'll keep my hand and my wrist moving and not so stiff and painful on occasion. So this is, like I said, a little bit of extra therapy. Now, once you're sure that this is good and incorporated, you can go ahead and stop and we'll set it aside, because the next step is to get our apples ready to go in here. So let's get the apples. Now, we'll get our cutting board back and we'll get our apples. Now, I have a 3-pound bag of apples. This typically calls for about 2 cups worth of diced apples, but I like to cut up a bunch of apples, slice them, and then use them together. So 2 cups to me with this recipe seems a little bit light. And what we'll go ahead and do is I'm gonna use the green apples, Granny Smith apples, a little bit of extra tartness in this in particular. I'm gonna go ahead and we'll get ready and get our knife out. We'll get our knives out that I can use to cut, as well as we'll need a peeler. And I like to peel my apples. I'm kind of weird. I like to spiral them as best as I can and get them peeled. And then, as I said, this recipe will call for diced, but I'm gonna actually slice them. I prefer to have the apples sliced a bit. So this is just a little bit of a twist in my way of doing things. I've always liked the apples sliced over diced for a pie. I've had the typical, like your fast food type pies and things that incorporate the apples in a diced way. It just doesn't quite do it for me for whatever reason. So we have our apple peeled and we're gonna get ready and slice it. Now, we'll get rid of the core as we go through, but I like using a smaller knife for this part, just because. We'll go ahead and, my way of slicing it without having to use an apple core is I slice the sides around and then I'll cut the core out that way. So we'll do that again, right down beside it on both sides. And then there we go. Our core is essentially removed. And again, we'll just go ahead and slice it into some decent thickness pieces. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy. Up to you on preference, but I like making them semi-small and then setting them aside. Now, depending on how quick you're going to use them and bake them, this is a point where, let's say you're just getting everything prepared, you're gonna bake it later. You could get it prepared and you could coat these in a little bit of lemon juice to keep them preserved and not browning until time to use, but you don't want to use a lot. But if you are ready to use them as opposed to preserving them, then all you have to do is do this, slice them, have them ready, and then they will go into the mixture when you're done. And again, the recipe calls for about 2 cups. I'll probably use a little bit more than that. You'll see in the end. But I'm gonna go ahead and get the rest of these sliced up after they're peeled and then show you the results, and then we'll get ready to stir them in. All right, so we have our apples all sliced down, and we have actually about 4 total of the green Granny Smith apples sliced down and mixed up in here. Now again, they do call for 2 cups of diced apples, but I didn't dice them, I sliced them. I wanted them that way. And I never really go by the exact measurement because of the fact that I tend to like a fuller pie, and I like to make sure that we have the mixture evenly distributed. And sometimes you have a little bit of the mixture, it just seems like you have a little bit too much, and it kind of overpowers the apples or overtakes the apples. So I like to have some more apples to make it a fuller dish. So again, we used about 4, about the same size, a little bit medium to large size Granny Smith apples that came in this bag. And it was a 3-pound bag that I had bought. But that's our apples. and we mixed them into the mixture already. I got them sliced, got them put in here, stirred them around, they're coated, ready to go. The next step is to make our crust. So we're gonna get our crust out of the fridge and we're gonna lay it on the counter here. We're gonna roll it out flat. I'll get some flour, we'll put it out, we'll roll it out flat, use our pie crust dish, get it set up in the dish, fill it with the mixture, and we'll get ready to bake here. So let's get our crust out. All right, so here's our crust, freshly chilled. It's nice and ready to go. I'm gonna move that aside real quick before we get going. And let's get our flour. Get a little coating of that here onto the counter so we can roll this crust out. It's probably more than enough. And I've got my trusty rolling pin here. I like to put a little bit of coating on it as well. Let's get our crust. Now this is going to be a 9-inch pie, and I have the pan here, so we'll go ahead and use that as our reference as we go. The pie dish that I'm using. And this is a simple crust to roll out. It's nothing too crazy, but if you can see, the edges tend to start, they don't really make a nice even circular shape. So this is kind of where your skills come in. You want to roll it. But you got to be careful because sometimes you'll have stuff like that where it tends to, well, essentially pull itself up onto the rolling pin. So that's why you got to keep it floured. I like to add to the rolling pin. Now we had a little bit of a split there, but by continuing to roll it, we got it restored properly. Yep, and it kind of came apart again. Now sometimes that'll happen, that's okay. We'll go ahead and we'll roll it up. And roll it out once more. And the flour will help it to stick a little bit less to our rolling pin. Now, in order to kind of match up our size and see where we're at, I like to use the pie dish as we go. Just kind of set ourselves a little bit of an indent there. And now we kind of see that we need to expand it just a little bit more each way in order to make it so that it's going to come up the walls of the pie and give us a nice even edging. So let's go ahead and do that. Just push it a little bit further each way as we're almost done and ready to get this into our dish. Now let's check it one more, and I think we are pretty darn ready to go. More a little push this way, and now here comes the tricky part. This is a little bit drier of a pie crust to start with, so when you go to pick it up, you may get some tears and things like that. Don't panic with that, because if you can get it transferred into your dish without hesitation, you'll probably still have those tears, but you can actually pinch them together in the process. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's try to lift it up and get it over to our dish as successfully as we can. Ooh. I like to use my trusty spatula here. It's a larger, wider one, just to make sure that we're not stuck to the counter too much. As you can see, it's already started to move. Sometimes it's fun to just lift it up with this. Other times, if you have the ability, you could hang it over the counter. But we got it moved into our dish, And now as you see, we've got a little bit of a rip over here, but it's not too bad. Stick the pie crust down in here, press it in. Now I did forget to mention, I actually buttered the dish before putting it here because you can grease it, you can use oil and things like that if you want, but I don't like using oil. Oil to me with the pie crust, I've never had luck with the oil keeping it nice. I've typically ended up with the oil kind of burning under or inside the dish or cooking the outside of the crust and almost frying it in a way. So I like to use a little bit of butter. Since there's already butter in the crust, it doesn't really affect or change anything that way. Kind of keeps it moist. So we'll go ahead and, like I said, we'll pinch this area together over here and continue to press it down into the bottom against the sides. And then we'll get our little overhang going over here. Now we have some extra, we have some overhang. So what I like to do here, you can actually add a little bit of a fancy edge or trim if you want, and I'll go around and do that here in a moment with a fork. I'll show you how to do that. But first, what I'm gonna do is just take a simple butter knife. We're gonna run it along the edge, trim off this excess that overhangs. And we're actually gonna use that crust for something here very soon. We'll get to that momentarily. Now, if you're careful too, you can kind of feel some of your areas where your crust might be a little bit thicker or thinner. And if you can feel those thicker spots, you can kind of redistribute it just by pushing it a little to go over. But you also have to be careful because whatever you grease the dish with only lasts so much in keeping it from getting too sticky to the edges. But as you can see, there is our pie crust officially formed in our dish. We've trimmed the edge. And as I said, we'll go ahead and add a little bit of decorative to it. I like to sometimes just do a simple, just take the fork and go along the edge carefully, because if you go too deep, you'll pull the crust off. But I'll just add a little bit of a decorative crimp looking design here to it. Okay, and as you see, we've got a little bit of a decorative trim here, if I can get it in the camera, all around the edge. So nothing too special, and that won't really affect anything as far as the baking itself goes. Now that that's done, all we have to do is put our apples into here. So let's do that. Give it one little additional stir. Make sure they're fully coated, and then we pour them in to our pie crust. Now, one thing with this is we can definitely smell the mixture. We can smell the mayonnaise, we can smell the egg, we can smell the seasoning, and it's all through there. And that's a good thing. Let's just get it a little more evenly distributed in here and try to kind of flatten it in a way. Now it will kind of bake itself down. As I said earlier, you'll get it to reduce. It'll reduce in size some as you go. Now, if you remember, we already preheated our oven to 425. So what we are going to do now, we're gonna bake this for about 15 minutes. Then we have to reduce the temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and then bake for another 15, leave the oven on. We're gonna get ready in the meantime and do something else here. Now, we still have our flour here on the counter. We're gonna add a little bit more, and we're gonna use up this leftover dough. How are we gonna do that? Well, I have a little bit of an idea here in mind. So let's go ahead and roll this out flat to start. So we got this rolled out a little bit. We're gonna move it over, and we are going to do something a little bit fun here. Let me go ahead and bring my laptop over because I have an image that I drew up. A quick little chibi exusiai that we're going to cut out of the dough here. And it's not going to be anything too crazy, too special, too fancy. We're just going to try our best to make it look like her. And when it's done baking, it may not even come out right. It may not look like her, but we're still going to try. So let me go ahead and I have a set of cutting wheels here for pie crusts and fondant and stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and get our pie crust wheel set out. I'm going to use my image for a reference, and then we'll go ahead and get this design cut out. All right, so I'm going to start just using my butter knife and kind of give myself a little bit of a guideline here. All right, so we got our basic outline done here, and we're just gonna go ahead and use this pie cutting wheel to cut our outline. All right, so from here, we're not gonna cut it, but we're just gonna kind of score things a little bit just to give her a little bit more of a definitive shape here. So again, this isn't perfect. This isn't by any means going to be perfect, but we want her to look pretty nice, don't we? So we'll go ahead and continue making our design, making our pattern on her, and we should have her done here fairly soon. Okay, real basic, put the design on and done. However, what is the Sankta without a halo? So hopefully our scoring here, when we go to bake this, it will come out, it'll puff out a little bit more, and we'll be able to see, and maybe if we can, we'll try to add some color in the end. But for now, we need a quick halo. So we'll take some of the leftover crust here, and we'll just roll it out flat. And let's cut a quick halo right off the side of the camera here. And then we'll put it above Exu. Okay. And with that, let's pinch the end together. But there is our Exu with a halo that will go on the middle of the cake. Now I might whip up a quick little egg wash for the top of that just to make sure that it doesn't burn or anything like that. But our last step here, while we're waiting, we've got a couple minutes left before we have to reduce the heat of this pie. We are going to go ahead and make our streusel topping. So let's go ahead and move our laptop out of the way. Let's get a small glass bowl. Let's move our little Exu over here. Let's get a small glass bowl and get ready here to make our streusel topping. So next up, we need 1/3 of a cup of flour. We'll scoop that out into the bowl. We need 1/3 of a cup of sugar. And then, last but not least, before we get into our wet ingredient, we need a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Now I like to add a little bit more, so I'll kind of do this by hand. I like a good cinnamony streusel topping, plus the fact that, again, we're dealing with Exu here. Come on, Exusiai's got a little bit of spice to her. Our last ingredient that we're gonna add to this, though, is butter. We have about 1/4 cup of unsalted butter, chilled, and I already diced it and got it ready to go. All right, so now I'm just using a quick fork to mix our dry ingredients together here. And last, we are going to use this butter that I already diced up. We're going to put this in here, and we're going to use a tool called a pastry blender. And I'm going to use this one to go ahead and mix this together and create that crummy-like consistency for a typical streusel topping. If you're familiar with like streusel for like muffins or streusel for on top of little pastries and things like that, you'll know what it tastes like. You'll know that it kind of has that crumb-like consistency, but it's very simple to actually make. And what this does is this helps to crush that butter up into little tiny pieces so that it kind of comes off as this, again, this light and crummy looking mixture. So the butter incorporates with all these ingredients and it's ready so that when it goes on top of the pie, it will kind of caramelize a little bit in a way. It gets that sweetness to it. It just starts to brown up nicely. So we've got it mixed and ready to go here. It's all done. This will go on here very shortly. We are on the second portion of the baking process. We switched it over while we were cooking here, while we were baking. And all that is again, we decreased the temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. We continue baking for 15 minutes more. Right now, there's about 7 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. And then we leave the oven on. We will top the pie with this and continue baking until it's lightly brown and the apples are tender for about 15 minutes more. Now, I also went ahead and whipped up a quick egg wash, basically to go ahead and put on top of our pie here, our crust that's gonna make Exu. So we're gonna go ahead and get that brushed on when the pie comes out next. And we'll get Exusiai ready for her trip into the oven. Now, as I said, it'll be the crumb topping, it'll be her. We'll give it another last little baking for about 15 minutes. So then it should be done. It'll come out. We'll be able to chill it and then give it a taste and see if this is all worth it in the end. So let's give it a few more minutes here and I'll show you the topping process. All right, the timer just went off on the pie. So let's go ahead and temporarily bring it out of the oven here. Put down a pot holder to place it on. And as you can see, the edges of the crust are looking phenomenal. It looks great, but we still have a little bit left to do. Let's go ahead and add our streusel topping all over here. Make sure it's nice and evenly coated. You don't want to work too long. You got to kind of work quick during a part like this because you don't want it to cool down too much. You want it to remain at temp to be able to finish properly in the oven. Okay, topping is on. And last but not least, we need to apply our Exu. So, with her being beside here, let me scoop her up onto that, press her in, and then her little halo on the top. And then, as I said, we made a little egg wash. I don't really have a brush here, unfortunately, so I'm gonna do this by finger. And we're just gonna coat this lightly. Now again, usually you would have a brush, but that's okay. If you don't, you could do something like this. Just make sure you get enough on it. Do a light coating. For something like this, you don't want to do overboard because sometimes it will kind of make a weird texture or look to the top of it. It almost acts like an oil in a way at that point if you have too much. Got to be careful here because we don't want to ruin our lines. We also don't want to pull the crumb topping up. Now, where this decorating a cake, I probably could have made her face look a little bit better, but I'm good with cake decorating and stuff like that. But trying to carve a design into pie crust, this is actually the first time I'm doing that. So it's a fun little skill. Let's go ahead and get this back into the oven, still on 350 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 15 minutes longer. And get this crust on top and the streusel topping done for the finish now. All right, and now we have our completed Exusiai's apple pie with mayonnaise. So now all that's left to do is to let it chill. Now this particular crust, it doesn't take long to cook. As you can see, the edge is browned. Over here it's a little bit darker, but since we put this piece on for about 15 minutes, we added the egg wash. It did kind of help to speed up the cooking process, but if you're worried about this being a little bit underdone, you can put it in for a few more minutes, or you can even pre-bake if you want to do a design like this on yours. You could pre-bake that on a cookie sheet for a little bit longer, and then take it out and use like a spatula or something to transfer it on top of the pie prior to or after the baking process. So with that said, let's go ahead and let this chill. And once it's done cooling, we'll go ahead and give it a slice, give it a taste. Phew. All right, so the pie is finished, and the only thing left to do is to try it and find out just how it tastes. So let's see if this came out to be something actually edible and enjoyable. Let's give it a try. All right, let's give it a cut. Sorry, Exu, we gotta go right down the middle. Now, as this chills further, this pie will set up a little bit more, so it's not 100% set yet, but I do like it a little bit warm. Oh no! This one is actually losing a little bit of its filling, but we'll scoop it up and put it on the side. Nothing wrong with that. A little bit of filling and a little bit of crust. But you could certainly smell the spices and things coming out. And there it is. It's a little flat because, like I said, it fell. But as it cools, it'll set and it'll kind of solidify a little bit more. But let's go ahead, get a little bit of the mixture, a little bit of the crust. We gotta make sure we get some apple. And here goes the bite. Let's do the taste test. Wow. Very good. Actually, very, very good. Now, here's the fun part about this. Under the circumstances, when you make the sour cream apple pie, it comes out and you don't really taste the sour cream. There isn't much in there. You get a cup of sour cream as part of the ratio that coats the apples with the egg, the sugar, the vanilla, and so on. This is kind of the same thing, of course, because what we did was we substituted the sour cream and we put in the mayonnaise, which was mixed with lemon juice to help give it that tang and that acidity. But you can actually very, very faintly taste the mayonnaise. But because of the fact that I incorporated the spices, the ground nutmeg and cloves, as well as a little extra vanilla, it helps to take away the power of the mayonnaise, the pungency, potency, whatever you want to call it. And between that and the tartness of these apples, the way that they taste, makes it blend together with the streusel topping, the sweet crust, everything, to actually create a very enjoyable slice of pie. Strange that you can slightly taste it and it still works and still tastes good. Everything else counterbalances it in a way that it's not like you're tasting mayonnaise on a sandwich where you have a whole bunch and it kind of, again, overpowers it, or maybe you get a sandwich out somewhere and they put too much on. You taste so much mayonnaise that you know the flavor, you're there. Here, it's just faintly there. Not enough that it's really gonna drive you insane and make you freak out. Let's have another bite. It's so weird how it works, but it's actually delicious. Strangely enough, very delicious. With that said, that's a fun, quirky little recipe that we managed to alter to create something fun from the Arknights story. And our little pie crust exu on the top came out cute. I should try to dye it next time and see if we can make a colored version of the crust to make like the red for her hair color, the whitish golden color for the halo, and maybe eye color and stuff. Would be a fun thing to try. But with that said, guys, I think Exusiai would approve for sure. And if you want to try this for yourself, again, I'll go ahead and I'll put the recipes that I use, the base recipes for sour cream apple pie, as well as this sweet pie crust recipe, in the comments, in the comments of the video, in the description of the video, and you can go ahead and use them there. But I'll also add my notes and my alterations for how I made the changes here. We'll go ahead and we'll put those in for you in the description of the video, and then you'll be able to check these recipes and try them for yourself. And I'll also put the notes on how I did it and the alterations that I did, I should say, in there as well for you guys to be able to use it and give it a try yourself if you want to. A fun little recipe and something that, hey, it's worth a try. It's worth the fun in our kitchen, and it always makes something awesome when it comes to our series of Cooking with Arknights. So, we've done other Arknights themed recipes in the past if you want to check them out, like Lapland's Millefeuille, or more recently, where we did use longevity noodles. Check those out. I'll put those links in the description as well. I'm excited to try many more recipes in the future. For other Arknights recipes and themed things, foods, drinks, whatever, I've got some other stuff planned and in the back pocket coming very soon. But if you have any suggestions, maybe you've heard a character voice line, or you've read something in the game story and you'd like to see it brought to life from the Arknights world, from Terra, let me know down in the comments and we'll give it a shot and try to make that come to life for you. With that said, I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day to hang out here on the channel and watch my videos. Please make sure to like this, subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want to see more cool Arknights related content, whether gameplay, food creations like this, and so much more. And with that, that is it for this one, and we will see you all next time.